The word socialism is used to describe two completely different realities. To some, it means a stateless, classless utopia born from revolution. To others, it describes a modern government that actively promotes free market enterprise. Despite that massive gap, every branch of socialist thought starts from the exact same baseline. They all agree that unreformed capitalism exploits workers and damages human nature. But the moment they try to prescribe a cure for that exploitation, the consensus falls apart. The biggest wedge driving these thinkers apart is what to do with the state. Do you burn the existing government to the ground, or do you take the wheel and steer it somewhere else? If you cannot spot which side of that line a politician or philosopher is standing on, modern political rhetoric is going to sound like a mess of contradictions. On one side of the divide, you have the revolutionaries. They look at the capitalist state and see an engine built specifically to oppress people. To them, it cannot be fixed. On the other side are the evolutionary socialists, or reformists. They believe the existing government apparatus is just a neutral tool. Win elections, and you can use that tool to engineer a better society. This creates a direct trade-off. You have to choose between holding tight to ideological purity at all costs, or accepting pragmatic compromise to actually acquire power. This table maps out how 5 key socialist thinkers navigate that trade-off. By analyzing their distinct views on human nature, the state, and the economy, we can see how the end goal of equality shifts entirely depending on whether a thinker wants to break the system or reform it. We start at the absolute extreme with Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, the foundational architects of revolutionary socialism. They argued that the state is nothing more than a community for the ruling classes, operating solely to enforce capitalism. Because the state is structurally corrupt, they argued reform is completely impossible. It must be violently destroyed through revolution. After the revolution, Marx and Engels called for a temporary transition phase, a dictatorship of the proletariat, to secure the new order. But their ultimate goal was for the state to wither away entirely, leaving a stateless, communist society defined by absolute equality of outcome. Rosa Luxemburg agreed with the baseline diagnosis. She also insisted that capitalism had to be violently dismantled. However, she forcefully broke from Marx regarding what happens after the smoke clears. She rejected the idea that the state should simply vanish. This text outlines her counterargument. Instead of a stateless void, Luxemburg insisted the old system must be replaced by a formally structured socialist state. Without formal democratic elections and free speech, she argued, the new society would immediately slide into tyranny. So even among the most radical revolutionaries, there is a hard split over whether true equality requires a functioning democracy to protect it. Moving over to the evolutionary track, we find Beatrice Webb and her philosophy of democratic socialism. Webb rejected violent uprising. She argued that working-class voters could use universal suffrage to capture the existing government and implement socialism gradually through the ballot box. Her plan was to slowly and methodically nationalize the free market economy until the state managed all resources, aiming for that same absolute equality of outcome. But Webb harbored a deep skepticism of the very people she wanted to help. She viewed the working class as intellectually imperfect, concluding they needed strict paternalistic management by an educated elite. A few decades later, Anthony Crosland pushed the evolutionary model even further from its orthodox roots with social democracy. Crosland looked at the post-war economy and concluded that capitalism had largely shed its worst tendencies. He abandoned the demand for total state ownership and explicitly accepted private enterprise. Instead of guaranteeing equal outcomes, he wanted to use state management and Keynesian economics to generate wealth. That wealth would then fund public services to ensure equality of opportunity. The final step in this ideological shift comes from Anthony Giddens and his third way. This outlines Giddens' rejection of the centralized state. He argued the government must step back from economic engineering. Free markets are highly efficient. The state should let capitalism run, collect tax revenue, and invest in infrastructure. Giddens' academic theories directly translated into real-world power, serving as the ideological blueprint for Tony Blair's highly successful New Labour government in the UK. Over time, the evolutionary path systematically traded the utopian goal of collective ownership for the cold pragmatism of market efficiency. This chart plots all 5 thinkers to show exactly how their ideas migrated. The vertical axis tracks state control, and the horizontal axis tracks the type of equality they pursued. Marx aims for zero state and absolute equality, pushing him off the board to the left. Luxemburg sits firmly in the top left quadrant, demanding a structured democratic state. Beatrice Webb starts high in that same top left corner with total state management. But as we move to Crossland, the dot drops down and pulls to the right, accepting mixed markets. Finally, Giddens lands deeply in the bottom right, relying heavily on free markets and focusing on opportunity. Over a century, the pressure of practical governance forced socialist ideology to walk back its demands for absolute equality, migrating steadily toward managed capitalism. You can use this exact trajectory to audit political platforms today. When modern Western politicians claim the socialist label but still happily embrace corporate enterprise, they aren't failing at Marxism. They are executing Giddens' third way exactly as designed. The defining debate in modern mainstream socialism is rarely about how to destroy the capitalist machine. It is about deciding exactly how much to tax it to fund the social safety net.